We continue our post-mortem coverage of the Toronto Maple Leafs, but today we're diving a little deeper into the goaltending position with Jack Campbell, an unrestricted free agent coming up this summer. A lot hinges on what he does for this team, so we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. We'll hear from Jack Campbell. We'll reflect on his remarks, discuss what maybe the next contracts could look like, whether or not we want to take that chance, go with Jack Campbell as the guy moving forward, and maybe we'll also look at a few alternative ideas. But that's what we got on tap for today's edition of Locked On Leafs.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Leafs. I'm your host, Mike DiStefano from TSN 1050 Toronto Radio, also known as Al's brother on TSN's Overdrive and TSN 1050's Leafs Lunch. Joining me, it's my co-host, Dave Morassutti from Sportsnet, also writer for the NHLPA. Locked On Leafs is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, so be sure to subscribe for free wherever you get your podcast from. You can also now catch us up on video on YouTube as well. Make sure you hit subscribe. Once we get to 1,000, and we've crossed over the 800 mark, Dave, once we get to 1,000, we're still going to do that Leafs jersey giveaway. So in order to be involved in that one, you got to make sure that you hit subscribe and leave a thumbs up also on this video if you could. And hey, let us know in the comment section below. Today's episode, we're going to be chatting quite a lot about the future of the goaltending position here for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Let us know what you think that the Leafs should do. Is Jack Campbell the guy going forward? Is there another player who you think might be a decent option for the Leafs in net next year? Go ahead, leave that comment down below. We'd love to discuss and hear from you guys as well. But Dave, why don't we start off by actually playing Jack Campbell's full press conference? It's about 5 minutes or so, but it's I think it's good audio. Playing Jack Campbell's full end of season press conference, and then we can kind of go through our takeaways of what we learned, what we think we know based off of what Jack Campbell had to say.
All right, let me cue that up. Here we go.
Days to reflect on what happened, just your thoughts on the season as a whole and how it ended for you guys.
Yeah, it's definitely been a lot of reflecting and just really proud of the team. We're right there and everybody laid it on the line. And, like Coach said, after the business, we got to win. But, definitely proud of everybody's effort and, what they brought to the playoff series.
The big question around the team is actually you, right? You're an unrestricted free agent. Your thoughts on what this summer holds for you in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly haven't had any time to think about it. I know it sounds funny, but just winning here means everything to me. And I love the city of Toronto. I love the fans, the support. My teammates are absolutely incredible. The coaching staff, really everything. So, obviously it's a tough loss. We were right there, and that's all I've had time to think about. But as far as negotiating and all that, that'll be up to Kyle and my agent.
Jack, how do you look back on this season personally? You all-star appearance, but then some struggles mid-season. How do you sort of wrap it all together?
Just learning, really my first year as a starting goalie, I learned a ton and, ups and downs, but I definitely learned from it and I'm ready to keep getting better this summer and can't wait to see what we can do as a team and myself personally next season.
What was the key to putting yourself back together, do you think, and playing so well down the stretch after
Yeah, that's something I learned through the negative time, coming back. I definitely was thinking a little too much during that tough stretch and, just going out and having fun and competing for my guys in the room. And that was really the difference.
Can you reflect a little bit on your initial thoughts on the trade that brought you here and what went through your mind when you realized you had an opportunity with the Leafs?
Yeah, I'll never forget that call. And, Kyle reaching out right away and our relationship dating back to even before the Sioux were he represented one of my best friends from Port Huron, and so I knew Kyle before that, and just so excited to try to get it done and with this team and have success, in the playoffs. He didn't put any pressure on me or anything, and I just remember him saying, "Just be yourself," and definitely feel like I can still give him more, getting the job done in the playoffs. But it's just been an unbelievable experience, and I just absolutely love being a Leaf.
How hard is it for you to be yourself in this market? Because there's so much media looking at everything that you do, so many fans with social media. How hard is it to absorb that and be Jack Campbell?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's really fun, to be honest. Like, I love the guys in the room, and at the end of the day, that's who we go to battle with, and the coaches and management and the fans are cheering us on. So, the extra attention really is, from the media side or whatnot. It's just part of it, and I think it's awesome. And it really is a hockey player's dream to play in a market like Toronto, and it's just been nothing but amazing for me.
Jack, you said you love the guys in the room. Just speak about what happened to your buddy Mitch last night. How are you feeling about that?
I'm just glad he's okay. It's a pretty traumatic experience and can happen to anybody, but I'm just super, just glad that he's okay, and it's the most important thing.
Because of the bond that you have with these guys, Jack, would you consider taking a little bit less than you might get elsewhere to remain in the league?
Like I said, I'm still dissecting the playoffs, and my mind's still thinking about that. And as far as me loving the city and doing everything I can to stay here, that's up to Kurt and Kyle to discuss.
What stands out about the support you get here, Jack?
I'm sorry.
What stands out about the support you get here?
I mean, it's pretty. I think everybody can kind of see it. The way the fans have embraced myself and the whole team, especially during this playoff run, and getting fans back in the building for most of the season. It was just incredible and just so motivating, and it just makes me want to be the best person and player I can possibly be, and want to get the job done.
What part of the turning point, though, for your to come back next year, Jack? Do you support you get off the ice and getting you through tough times and knowing the people in the organization and that comfort level you have with them?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the resources the organization gives us to make us the best player and person we can possibly be is unbelievable, and there's no excuse to not get better this summer. So that's where my head's at, and I'm just going to try to do everything I can to be the best me I can possibly be.
Did you pick up an injury on the collision with Paul there in the game 7?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't feel great, but I'll just leave it at that.
What did that mean to you?
Yeah, he just, I think, just respected the battle and, our team. And, it's fun to go toe to toe with them. But, I'll definitely review it all and try to get better and hopefully do it again next year, but with a different result.
You're on mute, Mike.
I probably should have took myself off of.
We wanted to give Jack his due.
All right. So now we've heard from Jack Campbell officially, and over the course of the next couple weeks, we'll probably do that as we look into some of the other guys who spoke, whether it's G or Dano, Spezza, see what their future's like, and see if we can glean anything from what they had to say. Austin Matthews, pretty important piece. He spoke at the locker cleanout as well. We can see what he had to say. Morgan Riley, Tavares, all that, all those stuff. So I guess let us know if you enjoyed that first and foremost. If you didn't, I suppose we could not do that if you felt that it didn't add to the podcast. But I thought it was good at the end of the day. Why don't we see what I'm curious what you pulled out of that press conference from Jack Campbell. Dave, I'll let you start. What are some takeaways that you had there?
I mean, just the typical way you expect to hear from Campbell on the situation. He liked his time here. Like this presented him with the platform to get his career, a restart on his career after he was pretty much, put into a backup role in LA and trying to work his way into getting some sort of opportunity. it just seems like there hasn't been any, from what I can tell, there hasn't been any sort of progress on a deal. Just based on what, you know, the fact that maybe he's trying to temper expectations and not give away too much. But this doesn't sound like a Jack Campbell who's confident that he's going to be back next season.
Yeah, he kind of skirted around the question he was asked about if he'd be willing to take less, right? He
Yeah.
didn't say, I'll do whatever it takes. Like, I mean, it'd be pretty, it's not in his nature, I guess. I'm sure his agent said, like, hey, let's not negotiate with the media here, and give, Kyle and them every kind of advantage, I suppose. So I guess I didn't think he was going to say much, but he did say winning here means everything to me. And he's leaving the contract negotiations up to Kyle and his agent, and then just skirted around that one. I thought it was interesting that he brought up, how he was thinking a little bit too much during that tough stretch, and he also acknowledged all the great resources that he has here in Toronto, and that's not something that you get everywhere else. And I look at a guy like Jack Campbell in particular, someone who's never really been a starter, somebody who wears his heart on his sleeve, and the mental game is so big for a guy like that. And if he doesn't get that type of support and those resources elsewhere, is he as successful? Is he able to get his season put back on the rails like that if he didn't have the mental performance coaches and some other guys? Had heard through, the grapevine, there were some former players who had really former goaltenders in the city who had helped him during his rough stretch, had helped him get back on track at the end of the year. If he goes elsewhere, are those resources going to be going with him? You know what I mean? Obviously not. And if he chooses to go somewhere for the paycheck, maybe that they don't have, he won't get all that extra help that allowed him to have his best season and really his first full season as a starter. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening with Jack. Overall, though, Dave, yeah, it didn't sound like he assumed he was coming back. It's definitely not as much the slam dunk, I think, as most of us thought it would be. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, for sure. Like nothing's ever really concrete, right? But I thought it would have been different with Campbell just because I thought he's a guy that kind of like wanted that stability. He seems like someone who appreciated everything he had here and would
Hmm.
want to do what he can to stick with it, especially given how hard of a season he had.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I'm. It's a little disappointing to not have anything concrete on that, but again, the Leafs have to do the gymnastics with the cap, so it's not like they can just
Right.
come away with an agreement how whenever they want.
Well, let's take a break, and when we get back, let's kind of chat a little bit about his season. Let's break it down exactly what we saw. The first half, the back half, the season as a whole. We'll put a grade on it from our perspective, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about the numbers that we're hearing, what you'd be comfortable with in terms of a contract for Jack Campbell, and what's kind of the limit, the threshold that you think the Maple Leafs can afford to give this guy. So we'll do that on the other side. We'll also go through some alternatives from around the league potentially that could come in and help if Jack does end up leaving via free agency. So get to all that and more down the road here on today's show. But before we do, Dave, why don't you tell the good friends about Built Bar?
Of course, our good friends over at Build who have come up with another way to get us excited about having their lovely puffs. They have come up with not just the birthday cake flavor, which we've been talking about, but they are bringing back the brownie battered puffs.
Oh,
I love myself a good brownie. I'm sure you do, Mike. Sometimes you can probably eat half a batter of brownies, which is usually the best part of the brownie sometimes. But if you're looking to bring that brownie batter spatula taste into your life and then get some protein with it, you're in luck because Built has now create a new creation that is better than ever. The brownie batter puff. You heard me right. The puff that takes protein bars to a whole new level, and they're available right now on built.com. If you haven't tried the puffs yet, what are you waiting for? Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're delicious and they are chocolate covered marshmallows, guys. I don't know how many times I have to say it. It's amazing. All right. So how can you get a hold of this offer? Make sure you go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. That is promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off at built.com.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano. Dave Morcity with me. We are hosts here at Locked On Leafs. Dave, we're continuing to discuss the future of Jack Campbell here in Toronto. First and foremost, before I guess we kind of dive into the stats and whatnot, overall, what were your impressions of Jack's season? Could you give me maybe a quick, synopsis of your feelings of how his season went and maybe a grade on Jack?
Okay, so I'll give him a grade. I'll give him a B. All right. It wasn't as good as last season, right? Last season, obviously, shortened season, and he had to deal with the injury, but he was still stellar. I still thought he was pretty good. He was a Vezina caliber goaltender at the start. He had those struggles, and then he redeemed himself in the playoffs, in my opinion. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't terrible. So that's why I'm kind of giving it a B grade.
I gave him a C plus, so I guess I'm a little bit more of a tough grader than you are.
Definitely.
At the end of the day, I think I look at Jack Campbell, and a C plus isn't a terrible grade. That's what, like slightly below average or about average, a C plus, roughly there. And I think that's what he gave us. He looked stellar at the beginning of the season. He was an all-star total. I granted first couple of months. I mean, I'm taking a look now. The first 18 games of the season through the first 2 months of the year, between the start of the year and all the way up until December 1st. 12-4-1 with a 946 save percentage, 3 shutouts. Pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. Earned himself all-star honors. He was the Vezina betting favorite, actually, at BetOnline. I remember at Christmas. Like, that's how good of a first couple of months this guy had. And then he went off the map. Like, he really, really struggled mightily in the crease. An 896 save percentage the rest of the way. A sub 900 goalie from December 1st onward. And that's to me, not that's just it was fine, but it wasn't terrific, which is why I gave him a C plus. I mean, like if he was a 900 goalie the entire season, that's closer to like a D plus, C minus. But he did have those couple of strong months, and then he redeemed himself in the playoffs, like you said, which is ultimately why I got the C plus for me. But that was a long lull, and it was a longer. He struggled longer than he succeeded, I think is probably the proper way to put it there. And for that, I couldn't give him a B. I had so a C plus is where I have him. And then I guess the follow up question here, Dave, is Jack Campbell the guy that you want to ride with going forward? And if so, what's the price point you think is what you'd be comfortable with Jack Campbell if you do believe that he's the guy the Maple Leafs should try and lock up as their starter?
So when the season first, when he was on his big roll, I thought if you're going to be in a rush to get a deal done now, go with like the Cal Peterson deal with like the 3 years at $5 million per season at that time. But then we saw his struggles, the numbers weren't great. I'm like, okay, maybe not the $5 million mark, but you have to, if you're gonna incentivize Jack Campbell to come back, which I think the Leafs should do. You want some continuity at the position. The Leafs haven't exactly done well at finding goaltenders in free agency. If you look at what's happened with Peter Mrazek there, I think you'll have to give Jack Campbell some sort of term. Um, I'm always very conservative about how much term you give a goaltender in free agency because I've seen too many teams overcommit. The most I would give him is 3 years. He could definitely probably get more elsewhere. That's his prerogative. But if I'm the Leafs, I'm comfortable doing 3. And I would say you don't go more than 4.5 million a year. Just because he was a starter this year, but he's not an established starter. So
Right.
you can't give him established starter money yet, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think when I look at his deal, and I guess I'll kind of work backwards from how you answered it. To me, I don't see this guy. if he's coming back at you, which I've heard reports that he wants that number to start with a 5. I don't know if I can go there if I'm the Maple Leafs. I really don't. Earlier in the year, I think I would have been okay with it through the first couple of months. I got on this podcast multiple times and said, sign this guy up long term. I'm ready to give him something, and it's going to start with a 5. And then he went on that lull from about December until really early April, like December to April. That's a long stretch of play. And like I said, he struggled more than he succeeded. Like that's 31 game stretch. The guy only played like 40 some odd games this year, and he struggled in 30 of them. So I don't think that I'd be willing to go any higher than, like you said, the 4 million, maybe as high as 4.5 would be my absolute cap for Jack Campbell. A big thing you got to think about too is Peter Mrazek and the fact that that contract is still on the books. You definitely cannot afford to pay Jack Campbell anywhere near the $5 million range, and even really, I don't think you could pay Jack 4+ million and have Mrazek still kicking around. So that's got to get dealt with as well, is to get that contract off the books. But I think that'll happen. So I'm not really factoring into this and into the equation. But Jack's not taking less than what Peter got last year, right? And that was 3.8. So I think the number automatically, the floor starts at $4 million. But he's 30 years old. He doesn't have too much experience still, and the numbers weren't stellar at the end of the day. They were not stellar numbers this season. Like I said, the last 31 games of his season, 19-5-5 record, sure, won a bunch of games, but an .896 save percentage. And, when you look at some of the advanced metrics, they weren't great either. For the longest time, he was one of the best, goals saved above average guys. But let me see what it was from December 1st onward to the rest of the year, because I'm pretty sure he was right there at the bottom of the barrel when it came to that, because he was not a good goaltender. So I'm just bringing it up here, exactly what his numbers were. But I remember them being not great at all. But he was right there at the bottom of right at the bottom, of course. And a big thing that I think about when I think about Jack Campbell, how many times have we said that this team can win with average goaltending?
We've said it multiple times. I could count on both my hands how many times I've said the Leafs just needed average goaltending to get where they need to get to. But above average goaltender puts them over the top.
He gave him .896 goaltending in the final 31 games of the year. He went 19-5-5 with sub 900 goaltending.
Yeah.
Right? So obviously you want better than that.
Yes.
That is first and foremost. You definitely want better than that. But I think that it's worth noting that if that's all you need is 900 goaltending and you'll win 2 out of 3 games, a 666 win percentage at the end of the year, and that's all you need to do it, do you really need to spend $4.5-5 million on that, Dave, on average goaltending?
That's definitely a risk. The thing is it's so tough because like you don't want to give a guy term only for it to hit, come back and bite you in the butt, just like it did with the Mrazek deal. That's the cautionary tale, and that's probably why it has not gone done yet. That's probably why the Leafs haven't put pen to paper, because I think they're going to explore all the options out there, because there's going to be that little bit of doubt, because frankly, you can't be spending with a team so tight to the cap. You can't have a $4 million hole in goaltending, when you have other needs you're going to try to get done. But I still think Campbell can get there. It's just, I don't know what it was that caused that, second half, or that slump he went through. But he got himself out of it. I thought he played really well against Tampa. Sure, there were a couple games that kind of weren't at his best, but he went toe to toe with Andrei Vasilevsky and gave the Leafs a chance all the way to a game 7. So that's something you have to consider as well. But yeah, you really have to think about, is that investment going to be worth it? Because you just can't afford to swing and miss on it.
So when it comes to his deeper numbers, Jack Campbell from December 1st all the way until early April, he had a goal saved above average per 60, seventh worst in the NHL. In that, he was giving up half an extra goal per 60 minutes of play, on average. So he was literally he was half a goal given up below average. That's not very good. Not very good at all. And in general, when you look at it, he was third worst in goals saved above average. During that time span that I talked about, that where he really struggled. Like that's where the struggles were. Bottom of the barrel, bottom of the league. He had the seventh worst save percentage from December 1st all the way until the second week of April. I mean, it really was not great. And the biggest concern to me when it comes to Jack Campbell and why I'm almost hesitant to actually give him the deal, um, is high danger save percentage, second worst in the league behind Dan Vladar. So basically the worst in the league when you look at it because Vladar only had 12 starts in that span, whereas Jack Campbell had 26. And so Jack Campbell, the worst high danger save percentage at 733 in the NHL. And, a guy like Freddie Anderson had the fourth best at 856, just to kind of twist the knife a little bit in between that span. But the thing about Campbell is the Maple Leafs don't give up a lot of high danger chances. As a team, they were top 5 in high danger chances given up. So they didn't have to face a whole lot, but the ones that they did, the ones that Jack Campbell did have to come on, deal with head on, he wasn't able to stop them. And to me, that's kind of a problem. Because I feel like this defense, and they gave him the best possible performance that they could in front of him to try and limit those goals. And he made the easy stops, but it could make the difficult ones. And I don't know if you pay a guy 4.5, 5 million who's not going to make those difficult stops. Because, I mean, at this point in the NHL, I think you can get a bunch of goalies who can make the easy stops, right? The easy routine ones, he was making those. But it's the difficult ones that I think you pay a goalie to make. And Igor Shesterkin, a Andrei Vasilevsky, Ilya Sorokin, those are the guys who are all up in the top, and those are the guys who will get paid. I'm not so certain you want to give a guy $5 million if he can't make that big save when you need it in front of the net.
Yeah, I mean, I know this. I mean, look, the stats do speak for themselves. I also just know what Jack Campbell has provided this team with. When he was brought in, it was just to be a backup for Frederik Andersen. Then there was a question of what would happen if the Leafs couldn't keep Frederik Andersen and Jack Campbell kept, because you know what, if with Frederik Andersen leaving, Leafs could have been in a very bad situation, but Jack Campbell kept them from kept it from getting to that point. So I think there is something to be said about that. I also think the team really works well with Campbell. They support each other. They want him to succeed. They rally around him. That I think has to play a factor too with when you have to make those decisions. You have to think about you have to think about what's good for the team and the on ice production. We also have to think about the continuity and what you want with your locker room going forward.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point. But also, if you're Jack Campbell, this is your first time in your career that you can really cash out, right? Like he's now 30 years old. This will be his probably last chance to go out and get a big deal to set him and his family up financially going forward for the rest of his life, right? How much longer does Jack have left in him to make the type of money that he could make by hitting the open markets, and allowing a bidding war on a couple of teams who probably will give him a $5 million on the open market, and will probably give him an extra year of term once a bidding process starts. And that's where I don't think Toronto will be able to get there. And ultimately, I'm not sold that Jack Campbell returns to the Maple Leafs crease next year. I'm not. And it sounds as though a lot of insiders seem to be speaking about it as if they're also not sold that he comes back. And it almost like something has been slipped to all of the insiders, a little tip that said, hey, Jack coming back isn't as much as a lock as it may have seemed a little bit earlier. And a big reason for it is he's not looking to take a hometown discount. He's looking to make his money, the money that he believe he can get elsewhere, because it's really his last chance to do it.
It is his last chance to do it, but it's also I think he can satisfy both ends if he keeps it if he's reasonable with what he asks. I think the
What
Leafs
was the number? There was a number that Elliot Friedman threw out there. I think it was like 2.75 was the offer. I don't know when that was. That could have been at the beginning of the year. But like if that's a recent offer, or if that's where the Leafs are starting with their negotiations with Jack Campbell, that's probably why it doesn't sound like they're going to be able to meet in the middle anywhere, because they're pretty far apart. If that is, a relatively recent figure that's been thrown towards Campbell's camp.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know when that number was given,
Exactly.
right? It could have been given early in the year. It could that's the problem there. But yeah, sometimes the Leafs have put themselves in a tough position here. If they're
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. How much more convinced are you today that Jack Campbell should be this team's starter going forward than you were at the beginning of the season? Are you more convinced that he can be the guy, less convinced he can be the guy, or are you neutral? Are you the same? Do you still have,
I'm in the middle.
and if you're in the middle, then that means that number, if that is an earlier season number, if you're in the middle, that means that you're the same. You
Well,
wouldn't change that number.
all I'm gonna say is that's the number I don't think that's first like that's not a number you pay a guy that was been your number one goaltender. I like that's the thing, right? They're playing this as if potentially this is a Peter Mrazek Jack Campbell tandem, which it can't be, because I don't like Peter. You can't trust Peter
No,
Mrazek.
they could bring in somebody else. Like there's some guys on the open market that won't garner the money that they had to pay Mrazek for whatever reason, that I think would come in and they could stabilize and be number two. Or maybe Eric Shalgren can come in and he could start you 25, 30 games. Maybe Joseph Wall could come up and start you 25 games or so, 30 games maybe. Take a little bit of load off of Jack Campbell's plate, be more of a 1A, 1B type of situation, or more of a traditional, starter backup, but closer to a tandem as opposed to like a 50-50 split.
Again, the options aren't great. That's the other thing too. It's not like there's a clear cut guy that you can say you can get, and you also have to think, can they even get that guy, right?
Right.
You're like and you have to also think, can they move the Mrazek deal? What's the cost going to be to move off of that contract as well? Because it's not an easy contract to move. There will be a team that could eat it, but it's not going to be an easy move. So there's a lot of variables that have to be put into place here. I'm curious to see if they move Mrazek's deal. That will give me a better indication of what they do going forward, or they keep Mrazek and they somehow find something even better than Jack Campbell, which frankly I don't even know if there is a better option that you can find in the open.
Well, let's explore that. All right. Let's explore the options that are out there for next year, whether it's bringing a guy in through free agency, through trade. Let's get into that on the other side. But first, let me tell you about betonline.net. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sport developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, the Stanley Cup playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano. David Morrisudi with me. We are your hosts here at Locked On Leafs, a daily Maple Leaf show. The season might be done for the Buds, but the boys, Mike and Dave, here to stay all throughout the playoffs and all throughout the summer. So make sure that you are subscribed to the pod to get your Leafs fix even when they are out. So we're continuing our discussion here on what the Maple Leafs could potentially do with the goaltending position. We played what Jack Campbell had to say at his year-end presser availability. We broke down some of the stuff that he said there. We discussed what our thoughts of Jack Campbell was this season, whether or not we feel like he could be the guy, maybe he's not the guy, some pros, some cons, and ultimately what, a deal would have to look like for the Maple Leafs to be comfortable with it. And now, why don't we go through some of the options? Because a lot of it has to do with, is there a better option out there? Like we could talk about, paying him, 4.5, 5 million isn't feasible. But if there's no better option out there, you might have to bite the bullet and do that, right, Dave? Like I think ultimately there has to be a better option for this team for you to kind of move on.
Let me pull out. Do you want me to pull up the cap friendly page to make this a little easier, or do you want me to read off the names? How do you want
I've got a list of names here. Like I have the list of names,
Are
but
you
just
doing free agents, or are you doing trade options as well?
I've got a couple of guys who you could potentially trade for as well. So I've got like a whole whack of names here. So where do you want to start? You want to start with the guy who seems to be garnering the most interest, I guess. Um, for whatever reason, his name always seems to come up. I don't quite understand it, but John Gibson is a guy who is a number one goaltender, and he is a guy who has a pedigree of being a starter and has won. I don't necessarily know if that's like why Anaheim's somewhat starting to compete. Why would they get rid of their starting goaltender? Like, what's that contract situation look like? If you're on cap friendly, maybe bring his contract up because he's a trade guy, right? He's not a UFA.
Oh,
He's a guy that you would trade for, and you have to give up assets to go out and get. I mean, I don't even know what asset it would cost to go and get a number one starting caliber goaltender who's still he's not young anymore, but
no.
he's not old either, right? Like he's in his prime still, you could say,
He is,
in his late 20s, I think.
he's
So
28. He is
yeah.
signed until 2027, a $6.4 million cap hit, but he has a modified no trade clause, so he must submit a 10-team no trade list.
So I wonder if Toronto's even an option there. I mean, does he want to go from California with a sweet weather and state tax, and he's an American guy? Is he going to want to come up to Canada where you pay an abnormal amount of income tax and you got to deal with weather and this big time media market? I don't know. I don't know if he's going to want to deal with that, but it's an option, and it's probably. Would you say that's the number one option? Like, is that the best possible goaltender? Whatever it would take to get him is different. But like, if you look at Jack Campbell and you look at John Gibson, is there any other goaltender you think that could potentially be a better option than those two, or than John Gibson?
Well, yeah, that's the real question there, right? So, in terms of a player that can actually start, right? John Gibson has had some injury issues. I will point that out. His numbers have taken a bit of a decline over the years. Anaheim hasn't exactly been the best team either, so you have to kind of weigh those things there. Like, yeah, John Gibson. I see. For me, I thought when Ottawa had, you know, they had kind of had an abundance of goaltenders, and you try to get like a guy like Forsberg out of there. I thought that would have made the most sense there, but it looks like they are gonna just figure that out, or maybe they'll move off of Matt Murray, which stay away. Uh,
No,
so
pass.
see, like that's the thing, right? Um, you're not. I think is Jonathan Quick a better option than John Gibson? I mean, he looked good in the playoffs, but he also had to be carried a bit by Cal Peterson through the year. Is Semyon Varlamov a better option? Like that's the thing, right? I think John Gibson's a solid goaltender, but that's if we get the John Gibson of 3 years ago, not the John Gibson of the last 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it depends what you're getting there. What are some other names that you're kind of looking at as potential options here if the Maple Leafs consider moving on from Jack Campbell?
They're not great. Someone in our Discord chat, our Discord community brought up Connor Hellebuck. If maybe the Jets are in a position where they're not going to, I'm like, I don't
Why
see.
would they trade Connor Hellebuck? I don't understand. The two names that keep getting linked to Toronto recently, Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck. Mark Scheifele, maybe not even he's not come to Toronto, but I know he's a guy who Winnipeg, there's some rift there, so I could see why he's getting dealt out. I don't want him to come to Toronto, first of all. But Connor Hellebuck, why the hell would they trade him away?
Well, because at some point the team isn't going anywhere, it seems, right? He's been the reason why that the team has been as good as they have been. Let's be real here. He started 60, like he's been worked really hard. You have to. This is almost a position of the Jets have to decide: are they going to try to push to win? If they're not, what's the point of having Connor Hellebuck?
Why wouldn't they push to win? Is my question.
Well, it's because the team has a lot of question marks.
Do they?
They barely.
Go look at that roster. Go look at that roster. I mean, they had a down year, but ultimately, like that's a playoff roster every single day of the week. Like to me, you've got 50 goal scoring Kyle Connor. You've got Pierre-Luc Dubois. You move out Scheifele, but if you're moving him out, you're bringing in something else.
So
You got Nick Ehlers.
Dubois needs a new deal. Are you confident that you can get Dubois signed?
I mean, he's an RFA, right? So
But
regardless,
he has
you have his
arbitration rights.
right? But you have his rights. So yes, you will get a deal done.
So
Like to me, that's the competitive team. They're not going to tear it down.
Well, they
just brought in Barry Trotz. You think Barry Trotz or they didn't bring him in, but they brought him in for an informal discussion. You think that they're going to come in and say, "Yeah, come in, Barry. We're probably going to tear down the team, but why don't we have a discussion about you coming and helping this rebuild along?" No. Connor Hellebuck to me isn't even an option. If it is, pounce on it 100%.
Well, I don't think it's an option. I'm just saying that's what the Discord put out there.
Wow.
I just think the Jets. I think some people are fooling themselves and thinking like the Jets could barely put together a winning streak of more than 2 games this season. I think shows. I think the Winnipeg Jets aren't a bad team, but they aren't a good team. They're in that middle point. They have good players. Kyle Connor, Nick Ehlers, great players. Blake Wheeler took a massive step back this season.
Yeah.
Their defense, Nate Schmidt, that didn't work out the way I think they wanted it to. They have a lot of question marks on that team. But like I'm looking here, there's not many like a team is not going to be trading a goaltender. Like I don't see an obvious candidate that you could trade for. Gibson is probably the most logical one because Anaheim, I don't think like Anaheim doesn't make all those deals at the trade deadline. Like they could have kept those guys and says, you know what, we're just going to try again next season. They let Lindholm go, and he signed in Boston. Manson likely not coming back after he got traded. Like they're going young, and Gibson isn't getting any older. They don't have much. I know they don't have much in the pipeline, but that's. I just don't really see where else the Leafs can go to trade for a guy. I mean,
let me throw out a name. Struggled this season, but played better in the playoffs and has had success previously. It is Samsonov. Young, 23 years old, has had success in the past. He's had a down year. Can you try and capitalize off that down season? They seem to roll with Vanacek. I mean, they flipped it in the playoffs, so maybe it'd be a little bit more difficult to do now. But that's a young player who maybe you'd be able to bring in as your goalie of the future as well, kind of the now and the future. That's another name that I've kind of got circled as maybe a check-in on Washington and see if that's an option.
So if you let's say that's an option, you got to bring in somebody else with him. Like he needs to be a tandem. He's not a guy that you can bring in as your starter, right?
Yeah, I think you could. Yeah. You probably could go out and this is where maybe another one of these guys kind of come in, right? Braden Holtby is an interesting name for me.
He's another guy I'm concerned with health wise.
Yeah, that's fair.
But he's not a he was a better
goalie when he was healthy. When he was healthy this year for Dallas, he was a good goalie. I think he was a 915 save percentage goaltender this year.
I mean, he's better than Peter Mrazek. That like if you give me options that are better than Peter Mrazek, I will give you a okay.
His numbers are comparable to Jack Campbell's this season. Yeah. Jack Campbell's. And Jack's going to cost you $5 million. Braden Holtby this year made $2 million.
Well, also playing for Dallas, where the money you make is actually the money you make. He's not
Nah,
to
fair.
come into Toronto. But again, I would like that's an option there. Like he'll have many suitors. That I mean, he could even. I mean, Mackenzie Black was it? Oh, sorry, Scott Wedgwood was who. Was it
Yeah,
Wedgwood? Was it?
yeah. It was Wedgwood was the backup to the playoffs,
Yeah,
but Holtby's injury, which you have to factor in as
yeah.
well.
So
All
I'm
right,
just wondering who they bring in there to.
two more names quick. Two more names quick. I mean,
Okay.
Jarl Halak's out there. You could bring in another veteran goaltender if you really wanted to for probably a cheap price. But Marc-Andre Fleury is technically going to be an unrestricted free agent this summer. Don't know what his future is going to be. That is an option. Eunice Corposalo is going to be a UFA this season. That could be an option. Mikko Koskinen will be a UFA. That could be an option. I know you're not liking it. I'm just throwing out names here. Just throwing out names. Whether or not you want it, I don't know. But when the Edmonton Oilers actually started to defend for the first time all season, that team started to win games, and Koskinen started to have good numbers. I don't think that you can totally, like
Let's just
it's
say,
not.
don't look at the score of Game 1 against the Flames when you want to talk about the Oilers'
Oh, I
ability.
know Mike Smith allowed 2 goals in the first minute of the hockey game. It was 3-0 a couple minutes in, and now Koskinen is in net for that team, which is hilarious.
Yeah, so
But that's one name. And here's probably the bigger name that we haven't yet talked about. And this is the only other UFA that I think would rival Jack Campbell, whether or not he makes it to unrestricted free agency or not. But it'd be Darcy Kemper.
that's an interesting one because I don't know if Colorado can afford it. Like,
Yeah, they may not be able to afford him either. But does that mean that Toronto can afford him? Like,
well,
Toronto's in a pretty crap cap situation as well.
they are, but I mean, Colorado has to figure out, do they want to bring back Nazem Kadri? That's like, if you look at what the number one ticket for the Leafs right now is Jack Campbell. They don't have a Nazem Kadri that they have to think about bringing back, right? But
So they have $7 million in cap space, right? They got to bring back a goaltender. They have to re-sign Liljegren. They have to re-sign Sandin. They have to re-sign Engvall, who's an RFA, see what they can do with that. Possibly Andre Kasha, who's an RFA. You got to decide if you want to bring back one of Giordano or Lyubushkin, maybe a Jason Spezza. Like, there are some guys, you got to fill in that roster as well, which is going to take away from some of that $7 million cap hit. So if you're Darcy Kemper, you can't really offer that guy $5 million either, unless you're getting rid of a couple of contracts, not just Peter Mrazek, in my opinion. It would take a couple of deals going out the window to shed some salary in order to be able to afford bringing in a guy like Darcy Kemper.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, like, Darcy Kemper's good. Don't get me wrong. How much of an upgrade on Jack Campbell is he? Because Darcy Kemper played for a really good team in Colorado.
I think he's a big upgrade. I think he's a big upgrade. I'll be honest, I do. I think Darcy Kemper's a better goaltender than Jack Campbell.
Okay, no, that's a fair statement because I mean, he played for the Colorado Avalanche. It's not hard to see that he.
But he also played for the Minnesota Wild for the last couple of years and was stellar there as well, right? Before the Wild got Kirill the Thrill and became a bona fide playoff team, he stabilized the net there for a couple of seasons. But health comes into question with him, along with a lot of these other goaltenders. That's kind of the big issue with goalies nowadays. Health is always a question, and then whether or not, there's not many number ones, right? There's so many tandems in the NHL, and if you have injury problems and you're a tandem goalie, it really makes it ultra dicey. But at the end of the day, Jack Campbell, is he a starter or a tandem goalie, Dave?
I think he's a 1A in a tandem.
Right.
He is a tandem.
Jack Campbell, is he a healthy goaltender or does he battle injuries?
He's battled injuries.
So he's got the same things against him that Braden Holtby has against him, that John Gibson has. Well, no, not John Gibson, but that Darcy Kemper has against him.
Gibson's had injury issues too.
But he's a starter, is what I meant. So he's not a tandem guy. So, like, when you say, oh, but the problem is, the injuries, who you going to bring in alongside this guy? Well, you're going to bring in alongside Jack Campbell. You still have to bring in somebody, even if you roll with Campbell, right? Or you either going to roll with Shalgren as your backup. And if that's the case, well, Shalgren could also be your backup with Braden Holtby, I suppose. Or if anybody else that you sign.
Nope, that's fair.
There's not a lot of options, I think, at the end of the day. Varlamov?
I've heard his name. I think Ilya Sorokin's the future there, so you could consider it. But I also think Barry Trotz, wherever team he goes to, I mean, other than the Jets, but let's say he goes to another team, they need a goaltender. I think Barry Trotz will lot to bring in a guy like Varlamov to that team.
Maybe. We'll see. But that's maybe the last one. Did you find another name out there that I didn't mention? I tossed out like 7 or 8. So
Yeah, here's the thing: like every goaltender I can think of.
what about Carter Hart?
I thought about Carter Hart. My issue is it is he struggling because he's in Philadelphia, or is he struggling because he's coming down to earth a little bit? I think it's the first. I think it's the former. I think Phillies remains a tough place to play. They haven't been very good. Again. I think you have to. I mean, there should be no rush to sign Jack Campbell because you have until free agency. Explore all your options. See what. I think you explore the trade market from now until just before free agency. I think first and foremost, you still have to move Mrazek. I know that he's right now. Some might consider him a safety blanket. Personally, I don't think so. This guy's had 3 groin injuries in the same season, and it's been the same thing throughout his career. I think he has to go, and then you can find a couple. You just find a tandem. Find 2 guys that can give you 82 games. I don't think it's that hard. They did it this season, and you have Shalgren in the pipeline there. He's a bit of a safety net that you can give him 20 games.
Maybe get 20 games. I'll throw one other name out at you. Last name for you in terms of trade potential partners here. Linus Ullmark.
Oh, that contract's a bit of a pain though.
Is it? What's he got? What'd that sign? 4 times 5?
He is 4 times 5. And he has a no movement clause.
They gave him a no move.
First 2 years is a no move.
Oh wow, that's how the hell did he earn a no movement clause?
Because Boston needed a goaltender because Tuukka Rask was leaving.
No, they didn't. They had Jeremy Swayman, who was the better of the 2 goalies.
Well,
but that's it.
Know that.
Right. Linus Ullmark, though, I mean, 26 wins this year, 917 save percentage, and a 245 goals against. Pretty good numbers. And I liked him in Boston, too. I actually considered him last year.
You mean Buffalo?
If they weren't going to, or Buffalo, sorry. Yeah. I considered him last year as an option if they weren't, if they didn't want to roll with Jack as the 1A and they want to keep him as a 1B option. I thought that a Campbell and what's his name here? Why am I blanking on this one? Ullmark. That would have been a great 1-2 tandem, 1-2 punch, but they opted to go with Mrazek. And
here's a name I'll throw out there as a high risk, potentially high reward potential. Mackenzie Blackwood. Because I think New Jersey's going to blow everything up.
That's blow what up?
That goaltending. They have not liked the goaltending there.
Oh, the goaltending, yeah. So you're going to take on the goaltending issues?
I think New Jersey's not a good team.
Mm-hmm.
I think you give Mackenzie Blackwood in his second season there. First 2 seasons weren't bad, and then it tailed off ever since Hines left. Actually, when John Hines left, everything kind of cratered down.
What was his? Oh, these are not offensive numbers. They're giving me these aren't goalie numbers. Why are you not giving me goalie numbers on Natural Stat Trick? It's not going to give it to me, and I'm not going to spend 5 minutes trying to find it either. Yeah, that's an interesting name. That is an interesting name. Maybe we'll come up with some more names. I don't know. Put it down low. If we nailed off like a dozen guys who could potentially come in. Whether or not any of them are actually viable, A, or B, better than Jack Campbell, remains to be seen. I think it depends on, what you're giving up to get these guys. I think it matters what type of contracts they want to sign, what type of contract Jack Campbell may want. I think that there's a few things that are going to play into this, but at the end of the day, I think goaltending is going to be a massive, massive thing to keep an eye on for the Maple Leafs throughout the summer. So I thought it'd be interesting for us to kind of take a peek at it. Maybe once free agency rolls around, we can look even more in depth and see exactly what options there are there. We were kind of just kicking stuff around here just for fun, but there's got to be a couple here that would make some sense. That the Maple Leafs, if they don't go with Jack Campbell, they have to have a plan B, and I'm curious as to what that would be. Or, in their opinion, could be plan A. Really, like if they decide just to let Jack walk, they should have a plan in place to fill that void, because that is a massive, massive void. Don't think Peter Mrazek is the guy to do it, if I'm being
No.
quite honest with you. So,
Here's one
yeah.
thing, and I know we're running over a bit on
Yeah.
time. Last thing I'll say, there was trade chatter around Peter Mrazek during the season. Just there was at one point, but then the Leafs rebutted that because Campbell, they needed another guy because of injuries.
Yeah,
But
and he got hurt anyway.
I still think they can get rid of Mrazek if they need to.
Probably. They probably could do that. See if there's a random goaltender. Random goalie. I'm going to go to goals saved above average. Who's a young goaltender who's per 60 minutes were spectacular this year. That maybe could be an under the radar type of pick. Oh, funny enough, Louis Domingue shows up. Louis Domingue. Oh, interesting. I don't know if you'll be able to get him because he'll probably end up being this team's backup next season. Spencer Martin had a terrific few games for Vancouver this year. I'm just saying. Not that I think he's a guy who I'm looking at to be this team starter, but if you're looking for a tandem, oh, that's an interesting name that had a great, great few games when he ended up getting thrust into position. But Sorokin,
I think we can. We'll have to look at more names.
yeah, Billy Huso is going to be a UFA potentially. He's another one of those names that you kind of take a peek at. Yeah, so there's options. We could say that there are options. If there are they any better than Jack Campbell? I guess that remains to be seen. All right, Dave, let's finish her up here today. Good stuff, good show. This is what we have to look forward to in the offseason. It's all about the speculation game for the next couple of weeks, couple of months, actually, until things start to really get going. All right, that's going to do it for us here today on the pod. I'd like to thank you for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasting platforms and receive daily Maple Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morasuti. And follow the show at Locked On Leafs. And make sure that you are subscribed to us wherever you get your podcast. Also on YouTube. We'll be back with our episode tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.